Over the last 30 years of Cleveland baseball, we've seen some really good teams, some teams that got really close to finishing the job, but not close enough. We're going to twist the knife a little bit deeper today, and we're going to look back and do some revisionist history on what if the Indians had made this one trade in 1998. It's a What If Wednesday edition of Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This one's going to get a little bit spicy, I feel like, because when Justin brought up the article, I was like, I disagree with this. This is not how I remember it. This is not how I remember the discussion. So make sure you are tuning in, because I think I'm going to get on a soapbox in this one. Today's episode, though, first is brought to you by Gametime. Download the app, the Gametime app specifically, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. That's Justin's favorite people. Go check it out.
Sure is. We'll be using them. I know my wife will be using them for something coming up later in the month. I'll talk about that. We will talk about if the Cleveland then Indians would have traded for Pedro Martinez. I think a lot of people have heard this rumor over the years, did a lot of talking about this in the past, some articles, some studying on this, and we're going to talk about what might have happened if the Cleveland Indians had traded for Pedro Martinez today. Also, we have some current event stuff we'll talk about in the third segment today. Craig Albernaz, if I can talk right, without his accent, is up for 2 managerial jobs possibly, and there's some other stuff floating around about that. So we will get into how many coaches the Guardians might lose this winter and what the impact of that might be. So after we finish our what if, stick around for what if the Guardians lose multiple coaches this offseason. So, yeah, let's dive in. I'm excited for this one, Jeff, because this one has always been an interesting topic to me, and I like playing revisionist
first,
history.
We gotta do intros. Everyone's favorite part of the show. People have been saying, "Where are the intros? Where are the intros?" I'm Jeff Ellis. For those who do not know me, I've been the longtime host, one of the original hosts of the Locked On Network when it comes to baseball. Before that, I was a nationally featured draft and prospect analyst at Scout in 24/7.
I am Justin Latta. If this is your first episode, or if it's your 100th, or you're here every day, we appreciate you regardless. And I have been writing about the Guardians minor league system since 2007 at places like Guardians Baseball Insider, the News Herald, and the Morning Journal. Some of my favorite writers growing up were at the News Herald, Jim Ingram, and I know he wrote about this at one time. And that was if the Guardians, or the Indians at the time, had traded for Pedro Martinez. So the story of this one, if you're not familiar, starts out in 97, where Pedro Martinez was on an expiring contract, and there were rumors that they were shopping him. No shock, because the Expos at that time had lost everybody, right? They had lost Randy Johnson. They had lost Larry Walker.
Do you know who the Expos traded to acquire him in the first place? He was an afterthought player for.
I know they got him from the Dodgers. So I can't remember who it was.
For Delano DeShields Sr.
Oh, look at that. Okay, well, Cleveland should have. Well, they would have finished the circle by getting Delano DeShields Jr., which they did, but the Pedro thing never happened. So, yeah. So, the story is obviously the Expos were getting ready to trade him because he was on an expiring deal, and they weren't going to re-sign him. No shock, because the Expos were kind of Indians/Rays back in the 90s. Jeff and I have different memories of how this went down. We've seen, I don't know, I guess we've seen different research. I could be wrong. My history of this. And granted, now in 1997, I was 8 years old, so none of this comes firsthand from when I was 8.
I was 16, so it's a little bit fresher. And I didn't have cable when I was 16. That was me playing my Super Nintendo or my Nintendo 64 and listening to KNR on the radio. Instead of now 2 TV setups most of us have, it was TV, radio, and in the summer if I wasn't out with friends, I didn't have my license, so I was not doing that. I was that person. But I spent a lot of summer days listening to KNR and playing Super Nintendo RPGs. So I heard a lot of discussions on this. So to me, this is it's like guys like Jeff Sindelar and the Roadman and people like that were fresh in my mind from that era.
So the way I read it, other places when I was looking this up and this isn't the first time I've looked it up. I've read about it over the years. Most of the research I've done on it says that the Expos wanted both Jarrett Wright and Bartolo Colon, and there was even mentions of more pieces than that, which probably wasn't accurate because of how they ended up trading him anyway. In this day and age, he would have gone for a crazy amount more than this. And I don't think it would even happen today. Although the Expos are like the Rays, so maybe it would have happened no matter what. But the rumors that that are in the historical writing pieces I've seen were both Wright and Colon, but you remember it differently.
Yeah, no, the way I remember it on Sports Talk Radio at the time, and all the rumors was that the holdup on this deal was that it was one or the other. And specifically, Cleveland was willing to offer, I think, Colon and Enrique Wilson were like kind of the two big pieces that they would get the infielder and the pitcher, and that Montreal was like, no, we want Jarrett Wright. And the funny thing about all of this is, there's a lot of funny things. We'll get to it, but the funny ties of how it all ended up, because it ended up being Carl Pavano, who was viewed as a higher rated prospect than Colon. And Jarrett Wright, the guy they wanted the most, was the worst of the group. And, that's the way it goes. But the way I remember it, it was not both. It was very specifically because they didn't have a ton of depth in the minors at the time, that they couldn't really afford to give both. You go back that 97 season, didn't OJ walk after that year? And you had a lot of older players that they were hoping to keep one of the young arms. And that they had, Nagy still, but it was pretty clear at that point he was starting to wind down. So they were going to keep one of the young arms, and specifically Jarrett Wright, which makes sense. Again, it's a guy on an expiring contract who was going to cost a lot of money. They did offer Manny Ramirez quite a bit of money in 2000. That's a what if Wednesday for down the road. But they're going to have to pay Pedro a lot. And there wasn't even a guarantee he would be willing to stay in Cleveland. Like, he was kind of angling for more bright lights, big city, going to a major market. Was back then that didn't matter. You were not on TV as much if you were in Cleveland as opposed to Boston. We can go back, one of our everydayers, John mentioned like 1997 that Kurt Schilling, there was a deal that was talked about nearly in place, and then he took Cleveland off his trade list. So that's, another what if. But people weren't racing to come to Cleveland. They were trying to get guys. It wasn't always the most successful thing, in spite of how good they were, in spite of how nice the runs were. But I don't recall it ever being both arms. I feel like that is, and I could be wrong, please comment below, but like, am I right, people? Wasn't it that it was one of those players? They weren't offering both pitchers.
Well, they were offering both. It was the Expos demanding both, is the way it read. Is the Expos were demanding both of them, which maybe makes some sense, because they did get Pavano and Tony Armas Jr. from the Red Sox, so maybe that was the quote unquote equivalent, even though I hate doing that. You said that a lot of players weren't trying to come to Cleveland at that point. They did re-sign Kenny Lofton. That had maybe more to do with the fact they had history with him.
Yeah,
but in the 90s, they were still attracting.
Year.
They had attracted Robbie Alomar. Whose
brother was there.
And they did bring in guys like Eddie Murray and Oral Hershiser.
Who was at the end of their careers. They were not getting the premier guys then. They were not getting they tried to chase a few guys, and they couldn't even get like the Denny Nagel signed or the Mike Hamptons. I mean, they were getting guys towards the end of their career who were chasing. I was kind of curious, by the way. This is interesting. So the Baseball America top 100 prospects preseason for 1997. I guess I should look at 1998, but preseason in 97, Colon was 14th, Pavano was 17th, and Jarrett Wright was 22nd. So he was the lowest. By the way, 20th on that list, the great Kareem Garcia. If you, the top three were Andrew Jones, Vladimir Guerrero, Kerry Wood, but then you had Matt White and Travis Lee, just showing how fickle baseball is. But yeah, it's interesting that the reverse order. I kind of want to now see if I can find the 1998 top 100. But yeah. So I
think the question here is what would have happened if Cleveland traded for him? Because obviously those teams in the late 90s were missing a frontline starter. They didn't have. So the Pedro got traded in the offseason of 97 going into 98. He didn't get traded in 97. He got traded going into 98. Boston did immediately sign him to an extension, 6 years, $75 million, which obviously the time was a lot bigger. Now it doesn't seem anything crazy, but inflation and all that.
It would have been a lot for Cleveland.
It would have been a lot. There's no guarantee they would have done it. So they would have maybe had him for 98, and that was it. He might have been a hired gun for 1 year. So this is a little bit harder to do given the fact that it might have just been 98. And
not a great year.
I can understand, Jarrett Wright had a fantastic 97 run, right? He looked like he was going to be the guy at the top of your rotation. Cologne, did Cologne debut in 97? I don't think he did.
He did. Yes. So the interesting
thing, not on the postseason roster, though.
No, in 98, he was kind of a Carlos Carrasco in his time where he was a little bit inconsistent and knuckleheadish. In 90, I said in 97, it went Cologne, Pavano, Wright. In 98, Pavano was the 9th best prospect in baseball, and the other two were no longer rookies. They didn't qualify. So Cologne and Wright were both no longer qualified to be rookies after they pitched as much as they did in 97. Cologne had 94 innings that year. He was not missing bats. He was walking guys. He was home run prone. It was bad. He had a bad debut. The next year he makes an All-Star game in 98. So
he won the All-Star game that year. He was the winning pitcher.
And that's the thing. I mean,
I know you knew that because you loved the All-Star game.
No. We could talk about it, but I think probably the biggest thing is
talking about the 98 All-Star game. Okay, I'm in. Who else do you want to talk about?
Oh, no.
Pedro pitched in that game as well.
Was that the Ron Coomer year? I'm trying to think. I remember watching. There was one
All-Star
game. There's one All-Star game.
Tommy and Griffey battled for the home run derby that year.
It was it fell on my birthday. They almost never fell on my birthday, and I remember singing Outback Steakhouse with my dad and his buddy, and we watched the game. And Fred Couples was there for like the one tournament, or maybe I'm conflating things, but like this is the weird stuff that lives in my head. That is not the Ron Coomer year, sadly. It is the Scott Brocious year and the Dean Palmer year at third base. But I think one of the big takeaways is, unless they give him an extension, trading for Pedro Martinez is a huge loss for this organization. That ends up being one of the worst trades in franchise history because of what Cologne turns into. If they accept the Cologne deal, right? If they take Cologne and Wilson or Branyan or whoever that second piece was, even though Branyan never really got a good run here, but Branyan turned into Broussard and Broussard turned into Asdrubal, right? Or was Broussard Chu and Eddie Perez was Asdrubal? I can't remember who was
one
who.
Of the two. Yeah.
But either way, like you lose out on either Asdrubal and Chu plus Sizemore plus
I was going to get to that later.
It's like it's a win if you trade Jared Wright. It's a win if you do what Montreal wanted, what I believed it was, which was Jared Wright and someone else, and Cleveland holds on to Cologne. And it's a loss if Cologne's in the deal. Maybe not if you sign him, but if you can't, then yeah.
It's that all depends on if you sign. And yeah, from Cleveland's perspective, I can understand not wanting to trade one of those guys for a guy who might be here for a year, because you thought at the time, after 97, you thought Jarrett Wright and Bartolo Colon were the anchors to your rotation, because you still had, going in 98, you still had Charles Nagy, you could have Colon and Wright. That's a great 3-man rotation right there.
At the time, you didn't know about Colon.
Right. Well, you didn't know.
And they traded for Burba that offseason. That was the Sean Casey Dave Burba deal.
Well, the Burba thing was maybe what they opted to do. So instead of going for that, so maybe you wouldn't have had Burba if you had traded for Pedro, but you still would have had Colon emerge. Well, you would have traded one of them. Well, you still would have had Colon, Wright, and Charles Nagy. Although the problem with Nagy at that point is he was starting to show some.
And then they went out and signed Doc Gooden after facing him in the postseason, and Gooden actually had a good run for them. So essentially,
he had a good regular season, but his postseason was disastrous.
No, which is how it was the year before he was with the Yankees. I think, the one thing is it makes them weaker if it's trading both guys, because like Jared Wright wasn't great, but he was about a league average starter, and Colon was their best starter that year. So it's like you're trading you're doing two starters for one, as good as Pedro was. It probably makes them let's get back to this discussion after we come back from the break, because I think there's a lot more meat on this bone before we kind of dive into a few more bits and pieces on today's show.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the playoffs and just in general, if Cleveland could have actually won it all with Pedro, even that 1 year. So we'll talk about that on a What If Wednesday of Locked On Guardians.
But first, let's talk about our good friends over at PrizePicks. You hear me talk about them all the time. That's because they've been with us all year, and we appreciate them for that. And what I appreciate with them right now is the fantastic deal that they have going on. I've talked about their Goblins and Demons. I've talked about the Taco Tuesdays. I've talked about the guaranteed wins they'll give you. So just the quick rundown. You pick more or less in 2 to 6 stat categories. And if you go for all 6, even if you don't win, they have flex play. So you can still pay out even if you are not perfect. And who is these days? But specifically right now, the fantastic deal they have going on is if you go to the website or download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, you'll get $50 instantly when you play 5. $50 free dollars instantly when you play 5. Just use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB to get that money. PrizePicks, run your game.
So we thought Cleveland would have had a nice rotation with Wright, Cologne, and Nagy going into 98, and they did add Dave Burba. Burba was okay in 98 in the postseason. He was not great. He did come in after the 98 postseason specifically. I remember this so vividly. Again, I was 9 years old, so this I was starting to become a little bit more aware, but I remember that ALDS because Dwight Gooden got ejected 3 batters into the game, and so did Mike Hargrove. That was Hargrove's last year. And they got ejected 3 batters into Dwight Gooden's start. And Burba came in after him and ended up winning 9-5 in that game. So it didn't hurt him as much. And ended up winning that series overall against the Red Sox. So Pedro still was very good against them. Ironically, they ended up facing the Red Sox in the first round. They won that series against the Red Sox. They lost game 1. Jarrett Wright got outdueled by Pedro in game 1. They still won that series.
They gave up a ton in game 1, and then the rest of that was
Mike
Jackson was closed out all 3 of those next ones, and Nagy did enough, Burba did enough in the bullpen, and they got to Tom Gordon in game 4, but
it was ironically it was the offense that struggled for them in the ALCS. It wasn't pitching. Because they lost and they beat the Red Sox in 5 games. Despite,
4.
Beating. I thought it was 5 in the LDS. I wrote it down as
4.
5.
I have it literally in front of me.
Okay, so it was in 4. Dwight Gooden did not pitch well at all in that series. He got roughed up in game 4, and he only made 3 batters in game 1. Which, by the way, can we talk about this real quick? They were throwing Burba out of the bullpen in that series, and they also used Jarrett Wright out of the bullpen in that series. A lot of progressive pitching tactics in that series for it was an ALDS. Maybe they did it differently, but very I think that was ALCS, I should say. I don't know, I can't remember now, but very progressive pitching style.
Wright had a start in that one. In the ALDS, Wright was he only started. He started.
Yeah.
No, his was a start in the ALDS.
And Burba came in behind Doc Gooden when he got ejected.
Yes.
It was the offense in the ALCS that failed them because in their 4 losses to the Yankees in the ALCS, they only scored 10 runs. So their offense and the losses were not good.
And they went up 2 games to 1 because Cologne outdueled Pettit. I mean, the extra innings in game 2, then Cologne outduels Pettit, and you're feeling pretty good at 2-1 lead. And then, New York wins the next 3.
Yeah, so I think you can win one of those extra games with Pedro instead of, I don't know. I mean, I can't remember what Cologne did in the LD.
He was like I said, he was awesome. He if you're replacing outdueled Pettit in game 3, and then unfortunately after that game 4 was Doc Gooden. They went Chad OJ in game 5, and then back to. And Nagy, they had a different starter. And is that true? Did they really have a different starter in every game of the ALCS? Charles Nagy got 2 starts. And then, and then so 1 to Cologne. They had, 1 to Cologne, 1 to Wright, 1 to OJ. Yeah, Cologne went 9 innings in that game. He had a 9-inning, 1 earned run. He was, Pedro, if you get rid of him and you do Pedro, it's not like Pedro's doing any better than 9 innings, 1 earned run. Like, Cologne was utterly dominant in his 1 start.
Yeah, so maybe you end up with 2 Pedro starts in 90 and 98 in the LCS versus the Yankees instead.
That's the thing. Again, like if you hold on to Cologne and you trade Jarrett Wright, like I said, all the talk at the time from my perspective, it's like you could have made it work with Jarrett Wright, but you had to be willing to give up Jarrett Wright. And if this,
they didn't want to do that, neither of them.
But you get it. Like at the time, like it would have. He looked like an ace the year before. He carried that team in the postseason. He put him on their shoulder.
He did.
And it's hard, who knew at the time that he wasn't going to put in. Maybe I'll get myself in trouble, but it's like I think we all know now. It's like his focus was on partying and living the good life and being a 21-year-old kid. I had older cousins who witnessed him, going up to people at the flats and saying like, "Hey, don't you know who I am?" Like, he was that person.
He was Joe Smith in it.
Yeah. Like he
Allie LaForce in it, I should say.
But like, it was very clear he didn't want to put in the time, and then he put in that one good year in Atlanta and then turned back into a pumpkin. So it's
with retrospect too, he also, if you look back, the mechanics also were kind of iffy at the time too. Like with the knowledge of what we know now about mechanics, like mechanics wise, he had a violent delivery, and those are just things maybe we weren't.
I'm kind of curious to go look at his. I'm going to pull up his stats, and he was also like considered a good-looking kid. I remember that at the time. But here's an interesting thing. In '97, his FIP was a 4.34. His overall ERA was a 4.38. So it's saying that he is, but again, he was only 21. But like, he was going to be the face of the franchise. He was, this kid who they could. Morgan. So I'll say the other side is he had a BABIP below league average BABIP at the time. So that's that. And his K to walk ratio, not great. Like he did not miss a lot of bats. I'll be curious to see if that was the case. Can I get the minor league data as well? If he didn't miss bats in the minors either. His K rate for the post in the majors was not even 6.5. So things we know now that we didn't know then. God, I forgot they took him 10th overall. It was a really high pick. You forget that they had a pick that high.
Turning more into a Jarrett Wright look back than it is.
It is. I know,
Martinez.
But yeah, I think to get back on track, if you trade Jared Wright and Wilson or Jared Wright and Russell Brandon, you do a version of that. This team does beat the Yankees, because then you get him in game one. New York gets 7 runs in that game. They're not getting 7 off of Pedro.
Off Jared Wright, right?
That's off Jared Wright in game 1. Yeah. And then game 2 must have been Nagy, which went to extra innings where Burba got the win. And then they had Nagy come back on short rest in game 6 instead of having Jared Wright on normal rest. So,
and he was bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, you look at that, it's like, okay, they trade Jared Wright. So all of a sudden you have him in game 1. Maybe you win that one. Then you win game 2 and game 3. Okay. You lose game 4.
That series.
You lose game 4 with Doc. You lose
and you get
game
Pedro
5
coming
with
back
OJ.
in 6, maybe.
Yeah. But then you get Pedro coming back in 6 and then Colon coming back in 7. Like,
you probably win that series. Yeah. The question really that then becomes, if they win that series, do they beat the Padres? Because the Yankees obviously took the Padres to the woodshed.
Yeah. And I think Cleveland.
You beat the Padres. Yeah. And the other question is, like, if somehow you get him to stick around to 99, maybe a different story, because
that's a contract that I think, like I talked about on the show, they offered Manny Ramirez in 2000, 6 years, $17 million, $134 million contract. That's half of what Pedro got. Like, I think they could have offered Pedro. And if you win a World Series, maybe he does want to stay then.
Does want to stay.
Yeah. It's like you help incentivize that and make that something special. So I think that's the thing. It's
you wind up not facing Pedro all the way in 2000. No, and by 07 he was off the Red Sox. So I'm sorry that didn't make sense.
I mean, was it 99 or 2000? What was the one where he threw the perfect game out of the pen and where they
that was 99? That was the next year. Yeah, it was the next year. And game 4 with Colon on the mound, they gave 23 runs. They got shelled. You would have had Pedro, but you still would have had. You might have had. Still might have had Bartolo Colon if the Jared Wright thing worked out. Nagy was at the end of his career. You're kind of short on pitching in 99. And I don't know if you would have beaten the Yankees either. Yeah, the Yankees had a really great year that year too, but you're just beating the year before too. So if that had gone right, so we had that. You stick around in 2000, maybe they make the playoffs. They finished a couple wins short of a wild card spot in 2000 because they used like a record amount of pitchers.
Yeah.
And then 01, you still have him for 01.
And then you maybe don't make that Richie Sexton deal either, because you have the pitching.
Yeah, because you don't need all those pitching. And then 2001, you're talking CC, Pedro, Bartolo, because Burba was cooked by then. Chuck Finley was cooked by then. Jarrett Wright wasn't even a factor, so it didn't matter. So by then, you could have had a big 3 of CC in his rookie year. Colon was well into his career at that point. If you had retained Pedro, the only thing is, if you did, I was going to say there would have been no Sizemore Lee trade, but if you had retained Bartolo Colon in that trade for, instead of trading Wright, you still wind up trading Colon to the Expos maybe, and maybe you end up trading Pedro as well, and you keep getting more back. Like maybe that trade tree keeps going, right? Maybe you have Colon to the Expos, maybe Pedro goes somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Maybe he ends up going to Boston at that point, and maybe you you cash in on both those guys at the end of those careers.
Yeah. And, to go back to that 99 team, just very specifically, it's like Dave Burba was actually really good that year. 117 ERA plus. Bartolo Colon was great at 126. Nagy was a 101. He was a back end guy. Jared Wright and Doc Gooden were your fourth and fifth starters, and they were poop. It was bad.
Well, Jared Wright, that was the beginning of his injuries. Yeah.
I mean,
they were relying on like Steve Carsey at that point.
Steve Carsey had 3 starts. The next guy up, the 6th most starts on this team was 38-year-old Mark Langston. Chris Haney was next.
Great.
Chris Haney, and then Carsey, then Jim Brower, and 42-year-old Tom Candiotti had 2 starts.
That's right, Candiotti with his swan song in Major League Baseball for that.
Yeah, it was it's one of those things. It's fascinating, and we hope you guys agree. Let us know what you think, and tell me again. Am I right? Am I wrong? Is this a figment of my imagination? But Cleveland Sports Talk Radio at the time, I swear, was all on the idea that it had to be Jared Wright, and then it would be one or the other because they wanted to maintain pitching depth. And Cleveland, if you wanted to know, had the 5th best minor league system in baseball in 1997 by Baseball America. So they had the horses to get it done.
Yeah, that was the big thing. They always lacked that guy, and they should have gotten it done. And there's also a story out there about also trading for Randy Johnson. That's for another day, too. They could have.
Yeah, and like I said, Kurt Schilling in 97. There's a few.
Yeah, so they had chances for sure. I mean, if it was truly both, I understand why they didn't do it. One or the other, and obviously, like you said, if it was right, you made the right decision. If it was Cologne, you made the wrong decision.
But at the same time, like we can sit back and it's fun to talk about it, but I don't blame them at all. This is not one where after what we saw with Jared Wright, it's hard.
Yeah.
At the time, with what we knew, it's hard to pull that trigger.
It's I said, it's revisionist history for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this season and what the Guardians might lose from their current team. Craig Albernaz has been rumored in a couple of coaching positions, managerial positions, I should say. So we'll talk about that. What could be the implications of losing Albernaz and how many losses the Guardians could take on the coaching staff and the front office this offseason. On the rest of today's, this could be a future What If episode of Locked On Guardians. One thing you don't have to do what if on is if you use Gametime to buy MLB playoff tickets, NHL tickets. My wife is going down to Columbus for a conference in November, and she wants to see the Blue Jackets play. And of course, she's going with some family that lives in Columbus, and they talked about using the Gametime app. And they said, and she let them know, we have a code here at Locked On Guardians. We have Locked On MLB. You get $20 off your first purchase. Why are people using Gametime? Because tickets go down closer to the first pitch before a game, before the puck drops, before the event starts. Tickets always go down. And Gametime is a great place to check on those things. They have last-minute deals, killer prices, views from your seat, and they can also get you the all-in pricing. So if you turn the all-in pricing option on, you know exactly how much you're going to pay at checkout. You turn that feature on, and there's no question of, am I paying $20 a ticket, and all of a sudden it's $50? Where did that come from? None of that with the all-in pricing option at Gametime. It takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, NHL tickets, all kinds of tickets. With Gametime picks, they give you best deals you can find throughout any stadium or arena. Download the app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off that first purchase with Gametime. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Don't know how much more baseball is left in this season, but you can check out all the action at your SiriusXM. I have to search for the teams, the Yankees, the Dodgers, World Series, and over at Locked On MLB with our pal Sully, who's also covering the postseason as well. He might be covering, Jeff, some stories about where Craig Albernaz might land. So he is right now considered a finalist for the White Sox job, along with Will Venable and Phil Nevin. He is also considered a finalist.
That's who we thought could be here until he pulled his name out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then he's also a finalist for the Marlins job, along with also Will Venable. So Will Venable and Craig Albernaz are in play for the same 2 jobs. I think there's a good chance one of those 2 jobs is going to Craig Albernaz. I mean, I guess it could be Will, it could be Phil Nevin and Will Venable, and that leaves Albernaz back. As far as taking one of those jobs, I don't know. Albernaz has been around for a little bit, at least in San Francisco. He was there, and in Cleveland he's had a year. That could be a big loss. Bench coaches are kind of important for these managers, especially early in their career. Like, Tito obviously had a lot more experience, and he had, Brad for a while. That was huge for him to have.
Yeah, Millsy.
And then obviously when Millsy retired, he had
Hale.
Hale, who he trusted. The bench coach is kind of your blanket, right?
They wanted to keep Hale a year ago too.
Well, Hale was
he didn't want to.
That he didn't get. He got passed over for the managerial position. So I understand.
But they gave an opportunity to stay anyways.
Yeah, he didn't want to stay under that. So Albernaz is kind of, Vogt's, I don't want to say security blanket, but he is, a guy he can bounce stuff off of. He can trust him to have his back, but he can also trust him to tell him what's wrong or push back on ideas or all that kind of stuff. That's a big loss, I think, for. Yeah, that could be a big loss for Vogt. And it's only his second year managing. So losing your maybe your most trusted coach in your second year is kind of a big deal. And another question, Jeff, you brought up to me, which I honestly didn't even think of until you said it, was if Albernaz goes, is he taking someone from the coaching staff? And that leads to more losses on the coaching staff. I don't think he's taking Sandy Alomar. I know people keep saying Sandy Alomar, and I don't think he's taking Carl Willis because
neither of those guys have interest in. They're kind of lifers.
Right. Yeah, and they both have been working here so long, and they're both. I mean, especially Carl Willis is at the end of his career anyway, so I don't think he's going anywhere. And then Alomar has passed up opportunities, and then he stopped getting opportunities because I think he wants to stay here. So you brought up Kai Correa,
who we worked with
possibility
before
because they got familiar with in San Francisco, and Kai Correa, is the infield coach and field coordinator, some other stuff. So he's a position for him that would be a promotion if Albernaz goes could be first base coach, bench coach. He could be Albernaz's bench coach.
I also wonder about
hire him to a promotion.
Who we didn't talk about was JR Goldberg the star, but also the outfield whisperer. Remember who had all the
McGuire. Yes, JT McGuire, who everyone
could be, could be a bench coach or even an upgrade to like a fielding. Like if he got a fielding coach position, that's an upgrade. He could go. And like if they like him a lot, it's like I think JT McGuire could very much be in play. Brad Goldberg is the obvious one. He's always been one that you and I are pretty sure
the one I'd be most scared of.
And he got promoted because they were scared of that as well. I think he is, honestly, it's like Carl Willis has like probably less than 3 years left. Like every year he's mulling retirement. And I think Goldberg's the heir, and they really don't want to lose him.
Yeah, he wasn't. I mean, the fact that Brad Goldberg's moved so fast, and we're trying to get Brad of the show. Jeff and I have both interviewed Brad at different points in his both playing and coaching career, so we have a relationship a little bit. And we were trying to get him back on in spring training, and things just never really worked out. We're trying to do that again this offseason because Brad, for those again who are not familiar, went to Beechwood High School. He originally went to Coastal Carolina, but finished his college career at Ohio State, coached at Ohio State, and really
made it to the big leagues. 10th round pick for the White Sox. No, I'm just saying, like as a player, he was a senior sign who made it to the big leagues. Those guys don't happen often. Yeah. It's also an accomplishment as a player.
He made it to the major leagues very fast as a coach. He went from a guy who was kind of like a coach learning in 2022 to 2023. He was Akron's pitching coach. So he went from being in Arizona and just kind of learning to being the pitching coach in Akron in 2023. In 2024, he becomes the bullpen coach very quickly. Very much as a rising star in terms of pitching. And obviously, look what happened in the bullpen this year. Yeah, he'd be the one I would say Cleveland, you hope Albernaz doesn't take him, but if he takes a job somewhere else, and honestly, if I was Albernaz, I would. So I don't know how you
agreed.
I guess you can sort of promote Brad into the assistant pitching coach role, but I think that's Joe Torres right now. And I don't know, I remember a couple off seasons ago, they first originally fired Scott Atchison to keep Ruben Niebla. And then they fired, who was the pitching coach there, the bullpen coach they fired that was actually well liked. Yeah, Rigo Beltran was really well liked by the organization and players. And I don't know this for sure, but Brad took his spot, so you can assume that maybe that was let go because they wanted to keep Brad over Rigo.
I wonder if they could do like a dual pitching coach or something, if it's like, well, you're going to be the heir apparent. We're just going to make I feel like there's points where
then you're telling Joe Torres he's being passed up. Maybe Albernaz takes Joe Torres. Maybe that's what happens.
Maybe that's what happens. But it's because Ruben essentially became like the assistant pitching coach role that Torres has. That Torres is not.
Correct.
And like I said, it's very interesting. Rigo, as you said, was very well loved, but it's kind of funny how much that bullpen flipped with that change. And yes, some of it's the talent level and some of it's the players, but we also saw some of the players that were there take steps forward.
Yeah. And then obviously the front office piece of things too. Like we talked about Matt Arnold, who's been in play for some GM jobs. We won't really get to until this part of the World Series is over, which recording this, the Yankees won to push it to 5 games. So there's more baseball to be had this year. So all this stuff will be pushed back. And we'll probably hear, I don't know. I'll be curious to see when we hear about these jobs. The Albernaz one to the White Sox, like that team's far away. So I guess I wouldn't be worried as much about anything other than the fact that he might take some coaches from Cleveland, which would be very important. And the Miami thing, obviously, not in the same division, so it's less of a concern. But taking the coaches would be an impact. You already lost Valleca. I know some people are saying, well, who cares about Valleca? Still got to hire a new hitting coach, and we don't know who that's going to be. Bench coach, too. I'd be curious to see how they'd replace him. So Vogt, obviously brought Albernaz with him. I don't know. You don't probably put Sandy back in that role. Sandy has been the bench coach before, but he likes that first base coaching role. So I don't know if he would go back to the bench. I think Vogt would probably want to hire someone he trusts a little bit more, or not trust, but someone.
I wonder if
he knows.
Well, it's like I wonder if at this point in time, if after being the year with the staff, if someone like Correa would go back to being a bench coach, if he stayed, if they move stuff around. Honestly, I keep waiting for Luke Carlin to find a permanent spot on this major league team.
There's Luke Carlin,
he's a guy who I feel like for a while now has been kind of in line to move up. I know he's the catching coordinator, and there's a lot of value in that. But I don't know. Sometimes having that full-time major league position is something those guys. I mean, he has a full-time position, but just something less roving, more focused.
Yeah, you get a little more free time as a roving coordinator. I feel like you can take some more time off as a roving coordinator. I think I'm not sure on that. Someone will have to correct me. So we'll keep an eye on this. It sounds like Albernaz is a hot candidate for 2 jobs, so the odds are, pretty good. He might get one of them, and this could be something significant for the Guardians coaching staff 1 year into the Vogt regime. And you never know how that might play out. So we'll keep an eye on that as things unfold this offseason. Tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to talk about trades. Trade Talk Thursday. Jeff's got one trade he wants to present. We've got another trade rumor that was popped up over the summer that is sort of back in the news right now. Not current, but, kind of a revision.
I still think it's silly, and I'll explain why I think it's a faux rumor. I think it's a faux rumor.
I agree. I think this trade, I think that these two teams talked, but I think there's a little bit more being embellished than what actually happened. But we'll get into that tomorrow. Send us some trade ideas. Whatever you guys want to talk about tomorrow, trade-wise, send us some ideas, past or present. If you want to talk about trades this offseason, hit us. We'll talk about those. And if you have any past trades, we talked about Pedro Martinez today. If you got any past trades you want us to bring up, we'll get into that tomorrow on Thursday. It's your shows. We're trying to do what you guys like because you guys all loved Tuesday's episode. So.
Yeah, prove us wrong. People we have people been like, do you want more history? If you like history, go back and listen to that episode about 100 more times. That's literally our second worst episode of 2024 on YouTube. So, we're trying to figure out what works, we understand it's a big week in other sports in Ohio. It is a big week for a lot of reasons, especially on the football side of things and basketball, starting with the Blue Jackets not being terrible. But we appreciate those of you who have joined us, continue to join us, and have your friends join us as well. Thank you for listening, rating and reviewing, sharing that thumbs up. It all helps as we go through the doldrums of the off season. We make it fun though. Thank you for watching, and go Guardians. Go.